Hey guys, it's your host Jasmine
and Carmen,
and
welcome.
This is and this is Graph City.
Alright, today we'll be going over one of the most iconic graphs in data visualization history, the Rose diagram from Florence Nightingale.
To set the scene, it's the mid-1800s, and the Crimean War just broke out between Russia and a group of other countries who wanted to stop Russia from taking over too much land.
Florence Nightingale, an English statistician and a nurse in military hospitals at the time, was looking out at the hospital and noticing the unsanitary conditions at the time, and connected it to the high mortality rates. She noticed lack of proper sanitation, overcrowding, and inadequate ventilation that contributed to the spread of diseases and infections to the soldiers. Not to the shoulders, to the soldiers that were there at the time under her care.
This inspired her and her team of nurses to improve sanitation and healthcare conditions in military hospitals. Using her statistical background, Nightingale decided to make a graph with data she had been collecting to highlight the causes of mortality and the importance of sanitation during the war. Eventually, she would show this to the British government, including Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, as well as other policymakers and healthcare authorities.
She wanted to show that getting injured in the war isn't preventable, but saving those from infection and diseases is, if you have the right tools. Her final data visualization contained two Rose diagrams, a large one on the right and a smaller one on the left. The diagrams are divided into 12 wedges, each representing a month of the year. The length of the wedge was proportional to the number of deaths that occurred in that specific month. Nightingale further divided each web into colored sections representing different causes of mortality such as wounds, infections, and preventable diseases.
The black color represented death from other causes, the red represented death from wounds, and blue represented death from lack of sanitation. From the graph, it's clear to see that blue is way more prominent than the other graphs.
Her diagram helped emphasize the need for improved sanitation, hygiene practices, and healthcare reforms, ultimately leading to a significant change in the healthcare system.
She's iconic not only for her change in healthcare, but her graph continues to be studied today in the field of statistics and data visualization.
Yeah, it's crazy. She was literally credited for having reduced mortality rate in Scutari, which is the city that the military hospital is in. And her petition was what led the British government to apparently send out a sanitary commission that cleared out a broken sewer, contaminating the water supply, and improved ventilation.
That's crazy. Because according to Tim Hartford.
Oh, like the guy from Parks and Rec?
I've never watched that show. Anyway.
Iconic.
According to Tim Hartford, an economist, while she's considered a master of visualization, she also failed to tell the truth with her graph. Apparently her graph wasn't the cause of change, but that's what it implies, that she was the change to more sanitized hospitals. Mm-hmm. Hartford states that by the time Sanitary Commission arrived, deaths were already falling for a couple of months.
Oh, interesting. You know, I'm curious if they would be able to update a graph with the Florence Nightingale diagrams that are already there. But then somewhere in between, kind of mention, where the Sanitary Commission will arrive. In my head, I mean, I don't know how things were back in the 1800s, but in my head, because there was no, telephones, were they sending messages with pigeons? I don't even know. But, I feel like if you were to do that today, you would just call up the Sanitary Commission and be like, hey, we need you. And they would come, quick, right?
Yeah, but also,
because of communication.
Yeah, but the mode of transportation, too.
That's true.
Because how were they importing everything to the hospitals?
That's true. Interesting. I wonder how long it took for them to, figure all of that out. But even if Nightingale was a liar, she still had a very big impact on the healthcare industry. I saw that during the height of COVID-19, there were a couple of temporary field hospitals that had sprung across Britain to help with the treatment of COVID-19 patients named Nightingale hospitals. You know, it's interesting seeing the Rose diagram in comparison to COVID graphs.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like those two, although not like necessarily comparable, like in terms of like sanitation practices being the reason, or actually, I feel like that could kind of be a connection to COVID, because I feel like sanitary, like we're talking about like masking and everything, and that was a very controversial thing. Whether or not people wanted to mask or even be vaccinated. And so I think it'd be really interesting to see COVID and like those three categories of like people who have COVID, who masked, who have their shots, and then those who didn't do either, and the mortality rates that connected with that, because I feel like that would have been a very big thing. You know, would people today accept a graph like that if it was comparing that?
And even if, like, what would the units be?
Yeah.
Because I know with Nightingale's graph, it's like the area it represents is like the number of soldiers, but even looking at it, is that number consistent, or does like the number of soldiers change within like their unit, I guess?
That's a really good point, Jasmine. I also feel like it was a little hard for me to understand what the units were for the Rose diagram, which I think made it just like not appealing to me. I feel like there's not really a mention of like a source that's very clear. Like there's like a blurb of words, because there wasn't like a legend. There's like a blurb of words that that describe the categories, and so for me this graph wouldn't really hold up for me, especially like connecting it back to COVID. Like if this was used today to like sway people to maybe like mask or get a shot, which was very controversial. Yeah, I don't know if this would sway people today. What do you think?
I think it could be impactful if it was like a bit clearer as to what the measurement is. But I think this is like a good base to build off of.
Definitely. Even if it might not hold up in today's climate, I think it's something that's important that should still be acknowledged and studied. For the people who are doing it, you know, statisticians, data visualizists, visualizers?
I think it's visualizers.
Data analysis, like people who do data analysis, because they're the ones who are possibly doing visualizations. Designers, I think all of those people can really benefit from understanding what type of impact this diagram has.
Because like the story behind it too, like just even if it was a lie, the spark for change.
Exactly. You know what? She manipulated, but for a good cause. So we'll support Florence for that.
Yeah.
Shout out to you, Florence.
What about you guys? How do you guys feel about Nightingale's Rose diagram?
Leave a comment down below. And we'll catch you next time.